Times Square, the heart of New York, pulsing, alive, and this year, thriving with a revival of Broadway's finest. The noise, the horns, the crowds, this is New York. If you can make it here, they say, you can make it anywhere. Well, just a few blocks south of here in Madison Square Garden, the Democrats are counting on a revival of their own. A revival that will put Governor Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party in the White House. Tonight, they're looking to the inspiring voice of New York's own Governor Mario Cuomo to set the stage. The curtain is going up. Get ready for the next act of the Democratic National Convention.
Campaign 92, the Democratic National Convention. Live from Madison Square Garden in New York City, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening and welcome to the main floor of the main event. New York's Madison Square Garden delegates here for the culmination, the nomination of Bill Clinton. The candidate to be by the man who might have been New York's Governor Mario Cuomo. Making things perhaps just a little bit easier for Mario Cuomo as he steps into this pressure situation where so much is expected of him tonight are two things. First of all, the results of some new polls. A new CBS News poll and an independent bipartisan overnight poll both indicate that Governor Clinton's message, what he'd hoped for most to get out of this convention, the message of change, may indeed be getting through to voters. Also helping at least a little is the fact that independent candidate for president-to-be Ross Perot today lost one of his main players, Ed Rollins, out of there in Dallas. More about that perhaps later on. Still, this is crunch time for Mario Cuomo for two reasons at least. First of all, so much is expected of him after his great keynote speech in San Francisco in 1984, and also the fact that it's very hard to make a great, truly great nominating speech. Remember the last time when Cuomo made his reputation, so to speak, it was the keynote speech. This time, this is a nominating speech, and almost no one can remember the last time a really great nominating speech was made. Now, earlier this evening here in Madison Square Garden, they were ringing down the echoes, a tribute to a fallen hero, the late senator from New York, Robert Kennedy. This tribute was played some little while ago before we reached this point, the point where the delegates are now seeing a film building up to the Mario Cuomo nominating speech tonight. Let's go to the podium and CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer. Bob?
Thank you, Dan, and for whatever the reasons, this convention is working for Bill Clinton. It is accomplishing just what his people hoped it would. It is giving people outside the hall a more favorable impression of Bill Clinton. So let's go back to Dan now. Dan?
And let's go straight up to the podium. Mario Cuomo facing the pressure, facing the crowd, and walking to the microphone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to go over time. They warned me I might wind up playing the accordion on the Arsenio Hall show. So let's... Tonight I will have the great privilege and honor of placing before you the name of the next President of the United States of America, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas. It seems to me that this is not a matter of our wanting Bill Clinton. It is much, much more than that. We need Bill Clinton because he is our only hope for change from this nation's current disastrous course. Eight years ago, in San Francisco, some of us tried to convince America that while President Reagan was telling us we were all one shining city on a hill, there was another city where people were struggling, many of them living in pain. And we tried to tell America that unless we changed policies, unless we expanded opportunity, the deterioration of the other city would spread. Well, we Democrats failed to reach enough Americans with that message, and now the nation has paid an awful price. We cannot afford to fail again. The price is too high. For the first time in their lives, millions of Americans who took for granted the basic right to make a living with one's own hands and mind and heart have been denied the dignity of earning their own bread. Today, a 50-year-old father lives nearly in terror at the prospect that if he is laid off now, as so many people around him have been, in addition to losing everything else, he'll lose his health insurance too. What if I'm struck by cancer? My God, what about the mortgage? What about my son in college and my daughter who's graduating high school? How will they get an education? And when will they find a job, even if they get an education? How could it have happened in a country where the executives of companies that fail, the presidents and chairmen of companies that make profits by trading solid American jobs for cheap labor overseas can make $5 million, $10 million, $15 million a year? How did it happen? How can our middle-class workers be in such terrible jeopardy? 1 million children a year leaving school for the mean streets. 1 million a year surrounded by prostitutes and drug dealers, by violence and degradation of all kinds. Some of them growing up familiar with the sound of gunfire before they've ever heard an orchestra. Becoming young adults only to be instructed by the powerful evidence of their surroundings that there is little hope for them, even in America. Nearly a whole generation surrendering in despair to drugs, to having children while they're still children, to hopelessness. How did it happen here in the most powerful nation in the world? It's a terrible tragedy, not only for our children, but for all of America. They are not my children, perhaps. Perhaps they are not your children either. But Jesse is right. They are our children, and we should love them. We should love them. That's compassion. But there's common sense at work here as well, because even if we were hard enough to choose not to love them, we would still need them to be sound and productive, because they are the nation's future. It would be bad enough. It would be bad enough if we could believe that all of this unhappiness and failure is a result of a terrible but only a temporary recession. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is more than a recession. Our economy has been weakened fundamentally by 12 years of conservative Republicans' supply-side policy, so-called. In fact, supply-side was just another version of the failed Republican dogma of 65 years ago, then called trickle-down, which led to the Great Depression, and it has failed us again. Think about supply side. Supply side operated from the naive Republican assumption that if we fed the wealthiest Americans with huge income tax cuts, they would eventually produce loaves and fishes for everyone. Instead, it made a small group of our wealthiest Americans wealthier than ever and left the rest of the country the crumbs from their tables. Unemployment, bankruptcies, economic stagnation. Today, as we've heard so many times, a $400 billion annual deficit and a $4 trillion national debt hang like great albatrosses around our nation's neck, strangling our economy, menacing our future. Remember, we became a great nation by making things and selling them to others for their marks and their yen. But today, we buy from Japan and Germany and other nations the things we used to make and sell to them: automobiles and radios and televisions and clothing, giving them our dollars for their goods. And then at the end of the year, because we spend so much more than we collect in these reduced taxes, we borrow back those dollars, paying billions more of our dollars in interest, increasing our debt, decreasing our ability to invest in our children, our schools, perpetuating a mad economic cycle that threatens to spin us totally out of control. In no time at all, we have gone from the greatest seller nation, the greatest lender nation, the greatest creditor nation, to today the world's largest buyer, the world's largest borrower, and the world's largest debtor nation. That is Republican supply side. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is the legacy of the Bush years, the slowest economic growth for any four-year presidential term since Herbert Hoover. An economy crippled by debt and deficit, the fading of the American dream, working-class families sliding back down toward poverty again, deprivation, inexplicable violence. And after 12 years, Americans are disillusioned, and they are angry, and they are fearful. And Americans showed that with the quick embrace they gave to the sudden appearance on television of a provocative, wealthy businessman who said he'd like to be president. Before he told anyone what he intended to do or how he would do it, he used one word, and applause broke out all over America. The word was change. Of course the American people want change. Of course we want something better than George Bush and the politics of decline, decay, and deception. And beginning with this convention, we, you and I, must demonstrate to all the American people that change for the better is at hand, ready, able, eager to serve, in the person of, yes, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas. And this time we cannot afford to fail to deliver the message, not just to Democrats, but to the whole nation, because the ship of state is headed for the rocks. The crew knows it, the passengers know it, only the captain of the ship